mentally, I'm all set for Bernie. Communist, I had everything down. He's a communist. I was all set. And then we have this crazy thing that happened, right, on Tuesday, which he thought was Thursday.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press. And this is Ground Game. It's another big week in politics. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are locked in a head-to-head battle for the Democratic nomination, with another round of crucial primaries set for Tuesday. The night's biggest prize? Michigan, a state that has had Democrats on edge ever since President Donald Trump pulled off an upset there in 2016. So we're trying something new here on Ground Game. Because the political news is moving just so fast, we'll be bringing you episodes 5 days a week. That's right, 5 days a week. And our goal is to give you answers to the big questions to watch in politics each day. So here are my 3 big questions for Monday. Number 1.
We're working as hard as we can because Michigan is very, very significant in terms of the primary process. We hope to repeat the victory we had in 2016.
How important will Tuesday night's primary in Michigan be? Number 2.
Bernie, you got beaten by overwhelming support I have from the African-American community, Bernie. You got beaten because of suburban women, Bernie. You got beaten because of middle-class, hardworking folks out there, Bernie.
Can Bernie Sanders expand his base of support? And your third question for Monday?
While the risk to the average American of contracting the coronavirus remains low, it is essential that we find ways to mitigate that risk to prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
How is coronavirus impacting the campaign? How important will Tuesday night's primary in Michigan be? Great question, if I do say so myself. So Michigan is the biggest prize on Tuesday night. There are several states that are going to be voting, but Michigan has held this really important place in the Democratic political discussion over the last couple of years. You'll, of course, remember that Trump pulled off this big upset in Michigan in 2016 that helped him win the presidency. And ever since then, Democrats have been trying to figure out what is the best way to get Michigan back? And who is the best candidate to do it? It really has been one of the central questions that voters have been asking when I'm out on the campaign trail, when my colleagues are out there. And now we will have a head-to-head contest over who exactly is best to do that. Both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden want to come out of Michigan being able to make the case that their victories there, should they pull it off, portend good results for Democrats in November. It's really hard to know how Michigan is going to vote. There's not a lot of polling in the state. And as we saw during the 2016 Democratic primary, the polling was pretty inaccurate. Hillary Clinton had leads in all of those polls, and Bernie Sanders ultimately ended up winning the state. That's what Sanders is hoping to do again in Michigan on Tuesday night. Joe Biden goes into the state with a lot of momentum. He's putting out a real show of force, of party unity today. He's going to have Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, 2 prominent and popular African-American senators. They're going to be campaigning for him in the state. Bernie Sanders over the weekend had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the very popular progressive lawmaker, appearing with him at the University of Michigan. She got a great response. So both of these candidates, you can just tell by the way that they're trying to pour all of their energy, all of their resources into Michigan, know that this is going to be a really crucial state. Second question.
We are taking on not only the entire political establishment, we're taking on the corporate establishment as well. And I'm very proud that a year after I introduced this campaign, a campaign which has taken on Wall Street and the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance companies, you know what? We're just a few delegates behind Joe Biden, and we got a real shot to win this.
Can Bernie Sanders expand his base of support? This is a question that we're not just discussing in the media. It's a question that is really at the center of Bernie Sanders' campaign. His own advisors are trying to figure out, how does Sanders go from being this insurgent candidate who has a loyal base of support among young voters to a candidate who can represent the full swath of the Democratic Party? And honestly, it's a bit of a struggle for Sanders right now. If you look at AP VoteCast data coming out of the first round of states, we do see that young voters are sticking with Bernie Sanders. He has shown strength with Latino voters, but he is really struggling with other core groups of the Democratic Party. black voters. He is really falling far behind with Joe Biden in support among African Americans. He also is struggling with older voters, more centrist voters. And the question for Bernie Sanders is, how does he start to bring more people into his coalition? Sanders himself is not doing a ton of the kind of outreach you might expect from a candidate who's in that type of position. He's not calling the more moderate centrist members of the Senate or the House trying to persuade them to endorse him. He's certainly not changing his policy positions. If there's one thing we know about Bernie Sanders, he is an ideological purist, and he's not going to change his positions. He's not going to try to moderate to appeal to a broader set of the electorate. For as long as he has been in politics, Bernie Sanders has been all about trying to persuade people to come over to him, not moving closer to where they are. But it does leave Sanders with a bit of a conundrum. Can he win the Democratic nomination if he can't appeal to those people? And will those people come out and vote for him in a general election if he is the nominee? Will they be enthusiastic about him? Will they be willing to support his plans for Medicare for all or free college debt? We again heard that this is also a deliberation within the Sanders campaign. You have some senior members of the Sanders campaign who want him to show that he can appeal to more moderates. They're trying to get some endorsements from more moderate Democrats. On the other hand, you have members of the Sanders campaign who really just wanted to lean into what Sanders' strength is. They want to have more members of the so-called squad out there. This is AOC, this is Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, some of these fiery progressive congresswomen who are new to Capitol Hill and have backed Bernie. We did, as I mentioned, see AOC out in Michigan, and I think that gives us a signal of where the campaign is leaning. They want to stick with what's working. They are hoping that if they can energize young voters, if they can really get those liberals to show up in big numbers, that can counteract this real push we've seen from more moderates and more centrists to really rally behind Joe Biden. And your third question for Monday.
Those most at risk are seniors with serious or chronic underlying health conditions.
How is coronavirus impacting the campaign? This is something that we're really going to be tracking carefully over the next couple of weeks. Coronavirus is limited in the United States at this point in terms of infections, but it's obviously a huge concern. And it affects two different groups that are really relevant to this campaign. One, coronavirus is overwhelmingly impacting older people. Two, there are warnings for people who are going into big crowds. We, of course, have older candidates who are running. Bernie Sanders, 78 years old. Joe Biden, 77. It also impacts people who are in large crowds. Campaigning is all about large crowds, all about trying to pull people together at rallies, all about encouraging people to go and show up to vote. And of course, we've all been in polling places with long lines that are crowded, inside elementary school gymnasiums or church basements. So far, we haven't seen a huge impact on the campaign, but it's something that the top advisors to these candidates are really discussing. Is it responsible to encourage people to come out to a large rally right now? How do you deal with possible impacts to turnout? Should you be encouraging people to do absentee ballots when that's an option? In some states, Washington State, which is one of the states that's about to vote, they do almost all of their voting by mail. That's not an option in some places, but certainly considering that Washington State has been the epicenter of coronavirus in the U.S., that is a good option right now for people there. The other campaign that is, of course, watching this, the Trump campaign. Donald Trump insists that this is not going to cause him to change anything that he's doing on the campaign trail. He loves his rallies. His rallies draw thousands and thousands of people. This is really more of a community event for him than anything else. He insists again that there's not going to be a change, but it's worth noting that there are no campaign rallies for Donald Trump that have been announced in the last couple of days. We'll have to see if he does put something forward. But again, for these campaigns, it's a real concern about potentially pulling people together into a big space where someone could possibly be infected and then sending them back out again. The other side of this, though, is they don't want to be alarmist. And it is important to note that infections in the U.S. are pretty low at this point. And while we're obviously all concerned, this hasn't been a sweeping pandemic. So these campaigns are trying to straddle the line between being cautious and avoiding being alarmist. That's it for this episode of Ground Game. Now that 2020 voting has begun, we'll be here every step of the way, giving you all the news you need to know, 5 days a week. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. This episode of Ground Game was recorded on Monday morning. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com. From the Westwood One Podcast Network.